big storm will be impacting the United States today and tomorrow, and this is bound to bring even more severe weather to areas like the northern plains and the Midwest, with damaging winds, large to very large hail, and even a few tornadoes being possible both today and tomorrow. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know ahead of these two severe weather events and where those impacts will be the greatest here across both the northern plains, the Midwest, and even perhaps a bit further down to the south in areas like Missouri and maybe even into the Ohio Valley. So we're going to begin first with what the overall weather pattern looks like over the next few days to kind of paint a picture of what kind of severe weather event we'll be looking at here across the United States. So beginning with today, we do have a zonal flow across the northern plains, and what this usually allows for more of is mesoscale convective systems, but in this case, we're going to have a bit more of a surface-based event occurring here across parts of the Midwest, including Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin, where damaging winds, large to very large hail, and even a few tornadoes will all be possibilities today, especially across Minnesota and northern Iowa, which is where I think the greatest concern will be for severe weather today. Now notice as we go into late tonight into tomorrow morning, we'll start to see a little bit of a dip in the jet stream here. This will start to allow for more of these complexes of storms to try to develop as we go into the overnight hours Wednesday and even into eventually to Thursday evening, which we're going to see another severe weather event take place across the Midwest and even back through parts of the northern Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes region, which is where more severe weather will be a possibility. Now, once we go into Friday, Saturday, into Sunday, I think things quiet down just a hair, at least across the Midwest, but another low pressure system will eventually approach, bringing in another potential for some showers and thunderstorms and perhaps even more severe weather as we go into the weekend. And by the time we go into next week, we'll probably get some larger storm activity back over in the western tier of the United States, and this would eventually allow for even more severe weather events, especially across the northern and central plains and as well as the Midwest. And as we go further into June and as well as into July, the jet stream is going to lift further up here to the north, and what that'll allow for more of are bigger severe weather events here in both the northern and central plains, the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and even into the Northeast as we go later into the summer months. So that'll be an area to watch for. But for right now, the main concentration for severe weather this week will likely be the central and northern plains and as well as back into the Midwest. Now, I do want to talk more about the tornado threat for today, because overall today's event is going to be more driven towards hail, including the potential for large to very large hail, but there will be a couple of specific areas that I think where the greatest tornado threat will reside. So let's go ahead and show you the tornado parameter values and kind of give you an idea of where the greatest threat will be this afternoon and evening. This is what we're looking at right around 3 o'clock this afternoon. We are going to start to see some supercell thunderstorms trying to set up shop across northwestern Iowa, back into southeastern South Dakota, and even a small sliver here of northeastern Nebraska. And I also think we're going to have another tornado threat right across the central part of the state. I think we have a large area to watch for here. And so again, two different areas, one of which will be the southern side of this tornado threat back over in northwestern Iowa, and then the other one going to be in central and even into northeastern Minnesota, where any rogue discrete supercells will have an elevated chance at producing a tornado threat. And a strong tornado cannot be ruled out today in today's environment. So definitely make sure that you're taking the weather seriously today and have multiple ways to receive alerts. Now, though large hail is the main concern and damaging winds, tornadoes are definitely not something we can rule out in today's environment, as there will be a lot of wind shear, a lot of spin in the atmosphere, and that can definitely lead here to a few tornadoes across much of Minnesota. This is what we're looking at by 10 o'clock, and I just kind of want to point out here is that the tornado threat today will be primarily during the afternoon and early evening. That threat really starts to drop off as we go into the late evening and eventually into the overnight hours, and notice how these values all become a very light shaded gray. What that basically means is that we're looking at a near zero tornado threat across much of Minnesota. So I just want to preface that the main concern today will be during really the afternoon and as well as into the early evening, with maybe an isolated tornado happening after sunset tonight. Now here's the timing for today. I'm going to show you the HRRR model in two different runs to kind of give you an idea of the disparity between the two scenarios that we could see today. So this is just in Minnesota. We'll show you a more wide view in just a moment. Here's what we're looking at by 3 to 4 o'clock. Notice some storms firing up on the northern side of the state. More discrete cellular activity is expected up there, and a tornado or two will definitely be a possibility, with very large hail also being possible. By 6 o'clock, these storms, as long as they stay discrete, will have an elevated chance at producing a tornado. And then back over west of Minneapolis, we could see some clusters of storms developing, and anything that clusters together like this will be mostly hail and wind, but anything that can stay discrete could produce a tornado threat. By 7 to 8 o'clock, these storms are moving into eastern Minnesota, eventually into western eastern Wisconsin. Ironwood will be getting hit probably right after about 9 o'clock tonight. Eventually, as we go later into the evening and eventually into the overnight hours, most of the storm activity is clearing out of Minnesota. But here's what the other HRRR model shows with just the 6 hours earlier. So this can be the 18Z model run from Tuesday, and it'll show you that some scattered showers this morning, pretty typical stuff, nothing crazy. Storms develop on the southern side of the state this afternoon, but notice in northern Minnesota, that activity really doesn't ramp up until 5 or 6, and as long as that pushes out a bit more, that supercell initiation would happen more in northeastern Minnesota and even into parts of Canada, where a greater tornado threat would eventually reside. So we'll have to watch that closely if you're back over just to the west of Thunder Bay. And eventually, as we go into the evening hours, those storms again move into Wisconsin, where mostly wind and hail is expected there. But overall, the greatest threat for tornadoes again today will be back over in Minnesota. Here's the entire Midwest for today in the future radar. So again, notice showers and storms across parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin this morning. None of that should be really that severe. If there's any severe weather, just hail and wind, most of those storms will be elevated. Once we go into the afternoon hours, we'll be watching again 2 different areas, one of which back over it again in northern Minnesota, which I think is more certain to happen. I do think the threat that's going to be across these 4 different states back over in northwest Iowa is really going to be more of an isolated to widely scattered supercell event if that gets going. I think there are going to be some problems with that setup overall though, but if storms do get going, they definitely could produce a tornado threat, but more predominantly a very large hail threat. So definitely be prepared for that. Protect your vehicles, do all that sort of stuff here as you go throughout the morning, just in case you do end up seeing large hail later today. Notice as we go into late tonight, this is right around midnight, storms will be mostly clustered together into some sort of clusters, possibly some mesoscale convective systems. Very typical for June, by the way, but most of these, if they are still going after midnight, will be mostly a wind threat as those move into Michigan, and as well as through Wisconsin, Iowa, and maybe even into Illinois tomorrow morning. That leads to our next threat of severe weather, which will be tomorrow. And I do think, again, tomorrow we have another shot at tornadoes. I don't think the threat is going to be super high by any means, but I think we'll have to be watching this as we go into the late afternoon hours and eventually into the evening. The main corridor that I'll be watching for will be over here in southern Wisconsin and northern Illinois, perhaps over here into eastern Iowa as well, for a couple different spots to watch for a slightly more elevated tornado threat. But I think overall the main threat for tomorrow will be damaging winds and as well as large hail. So what does this look like on the future radar? Well, storms will continue throughout the morning. Most of this activity though is not going to be severe. Once we go into the afternoon, right around 3 to 4 o'clock, storms start to blow up across Michigan and as well as back over in Wisconsin and Iowa, and anything that can stay discreet will produce an elevated tornado threat. But I think the greatest concern will be large to very large hail. These storms will quickly become clustered together as we go into Thursday evening, and this should eventually become a mesoscale convective system moving southeast, producing mostly a wind threat, but hail and a couple of tornadoes still being a possibility as that rolls into parts of Illinois and eventually into northern Indiana. I think really the greatest threat though is going to be really just in this area here. I don't think this is going to go super far down to the south like Kentucky. Even if it made it there, it would be mostly just a wind threat anyways, and it probably would not be like widespread or anything like that. Now past today and tomorrow, storms will continue across a vast majority of the northern plains and the Midwest, as we are going to continue to see a really active weather pattern unravel here. This will continue to bring some more shots of severe weather, but nothing looking super significant though, at least for Saturday. Sunday and Monday do look a little bit more active there in the Midwest. We'll be back, by the way, from vacation on Friday, so any sort of live streams that are needed, we'll be back by then for that. Once we eventually go into Monday, Tuesday, and eventually into Wednesday, again, that active weather pattern just continues, especially in the Midwest where multiple rounds of severe weather will be possible. Then anything after that does become relatively uncertain. I do want to point out that there is a chance that we do have a tropical system that develops near Florida, probably though in the western Atlantic Ocean as we go into the late week, so around Thursday or Friday. Overall, does not seem to be anything super concerning here for the United States, aside from the amount of rain that'll be falling in Florida. Notice this as we go throughout Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Just boatloads of rain falling, especially in the southern side of the state, and look how much rain this is going to lead to. This is also including what we've seen from Tuesday, but also as we go through about Friday, Saturday, and even into Sunday, many areas back over in southern Florida could pick up as much as 5 to 10 inches of rain. Could even see a few locations upwards of 15 inches of rain by the time this is all done. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you're not already.